Welcome to World at Work TV. I'm Cathy Peffen with Marriott Vacations Worldwide, and I'm joined today by Jackie Jankiewicz of Avon Cosmetics. She's the Director of Compensation and Benefits for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So Jackie, we understand that Avon really was challenged in how they wanted to strengthen the governance for their sales process and their sales compensation system. Can you speak to me a little bit about why Avon wanted to enhance their governance process?
Sure, Cathy. It's been really a two-year journey. We started in 2013, beginning of 2013, trying to just gather up some information from a global perspective to have visibility on the sales plans. We operate in 64 markets, and we didn't have a handle on what type of sales plans our employed field force were operating under. So that was the initial take, to just get a feel of what was happening out in the field.
So what approach did you take when you had across 64 countries and so many different plans that you needed to try to get a handle on? What approach did Avon take?
So we started talking to heads of sales in our major markets to really understand what type of changes were needed going forward, and to try and get some sort of order and governance. Markets had been very much left to do what they wanted on a local footing, and there was no requirement for control or approval to change plans. And for some of our major markets, that was quite a concern for Avon, that there wasn't this governance and control. And that's when we set about designing some form of corporate governance, which started identifying roles and responsibilities. So what sort of things would we want to happen at a global level? And that was really having an oversight and vision and the strategy for sales.
That's great. You know, Jackie, what role did HR play? You know, you were obviously in the sales compensation role at the time, but how involved were you? Did you facilitate the process, or were you right there with the sales leaders doing all the interviews?
So I was in sales operations organisation at the time. Okay. So I was very much part of the sales group. But local HR was very much not having a seat at the table, and they were critical really to the journey to involve them and get them talking to their local heads of sales. Finance were already on board, and HR were really the poor relations, if you like. So it was critical to get them on board, give them some tools to then be able to support the heads of sales in local markets to start talking about sales plans and changes to those sales plans. Our sales force is huge, and that's a big people component that HR needed to be involved with. So that was a big step change for us, to actually give them the tools so that they felt confident to be able to sit around the table with heads of sales and get involved in plan design.
Right, so we've talked about the governance process and getting HR the tools to help you in your communication. Where did Avon end up? What was the big change in your governance process?
So we segmented our markets, and we looked at focus markets. So our big major markets across the world would need much more governance, for example, than our smaller markets. And our smaller markets we would leave to heads of the market or heads of the cluster to actually manage and monitor what changes were happening in sales plans. So we segmented all those markets and then worked through a sales leadership team. So again, having representatives from major markets and different regions to have a sort of governing body to agree what our sales plan should look like going forward, and have that sort of approval process.
From a governing body, who were the members that needed to now, if you wanted to change a sales plan, what's the process that you now needed to follow?
Right, so for focus markets, that was my concern, and they're 15, our 15 top markets. So they would go through local head of sales, the general manager, head of finance in the market, would do most of the plan design and most of the plan modelling within a framework. They would then sit down with their regional partners in finance and in sales and IT, if it needed any IT changes, to agree those changes to the plan, and then that would roll up to a global level. So we would have compensation and benefits, HR and global sales then involved in that governance process. But the final decision maker was the commercial business leader for that region. So we're split into 4 regions, and it would be the CBU leader that would really be the decision maker at the end of the day, because there's the whole design and comp piece, but there's also the commercial element, and what's right in some regions is not necessarily viewed from globally the same way.
So talk about the complexities. These focused markets, are they more regionalized, that they all tend to be in just Central Europe or the Americas, or do you segment them that they're really, when you do these plans, they really are global across your 64 countries?
They really are global. So we have 4 regions, and each region will have 2 or 3 focus markets at least. So yeah, so we have sort of 6 in Europe, 4 in LATAM, and a couple in APAC and North America. So yeah, they are really global.
So in communication and implementation, what were some of the challenges across all of these countries?
Okay, so we thought we had, buy-in. We had a sales council set up that had representatives from all the regions and all the major markets. So from a buy-in, had the key stakeholders around the table agreeing to the framework of governance and sort of the guiding principles around what our sales plans would be like. And the idea would be that would be cascaded out through the regions to the local markets. And that's typically how Avon will, communicate most things, and it's a cascade, train the trainer type of implementation. And I think, we can never underestimate how much communication is needed, because if I look back, that's probably one of the learning points for us, that, we couldn't have over-communicated. And that was testament to when we saw markets changing their plans. Some would absolutely know the process and they'd be spot on and follow it through letter by letter. And others maybe, missed out certain steps or didn't appreciate there were certain things to be done. And, I'm guessing that's partly to do with the communication up front, that if it wasn't clear enough, that they didn't necessarily follow that.
And when it cascaded, it was typically through the leadership ranks that, or did you have, was it one-on-ones? Did you have local market meetings?
So the initial cascade was at the sales council, so that was a sort of a global to the regional leads. And then within the region, they would tend to have a sales council group as well. So the heads of sales for that region would also meet on a fairly regular basis, and they were communicated through to them. And so a couple of those I joined, and and I was able to talk about the process and how we'd gone through, and that certainly worked well to be able to join those regional groups and talk through the process with them.
Well, that's great. And you mentioned communication, that you can never underestimate how much you need to communicate. What other lessons learned through either designing or deploying this new governance process did you?
I think I was a single person in the organisation with this sort of mission, if you like, and certainly speaking to people through the conference, it's been clear that I'm not alone in this, and there's lots of us out there striving to do, and you just have to keep going, and keep going and keep going, and that is sort of the most important thing for me. We did get there in the end. We did develop a governance process, and we did provide some frameworks to the organisation. But it's been 2 years and it's still not finished, and you just have to keep going and trying to, when you get rejection, when you're knocking on people's doors, trying to get in, to keep going back and saying, well, I'll try again and I'll try a different way, and so that's a key lesson, and obviously the communication is.
Yeah, so it's been a 2-year journey, and you just said you're not quite done yet. You still got a few more pieces to do. If you had to do it again, what would you do differently?
I would like to do it quicker, but I don't know if that's possible.
Right.
And also to really get the senior buy-in, from day one. We started with the right people around the table for Avon, I believe, and we talked through how, the roles and responsibilities, what we were striving for, and agreed a shared vision. But that wasn't necessarily then taken up to the EC level, and that's probably where I would like to have got the EC on board. I think that would have just given us a bit more momentum, and could have swifted the project through and supported the project through.
Right. Well, that's great. So, what final comments would you have for our viewers at World at Work TV?
To allow time for it to happen. You know, it's not going to be a switch that can be switched on and it'll happen overnight. You have to get the right people around the table, lots of dialogue, understanding the local needs of various markets. We couldn't agree to a one-size-fits-all. There were just too many nuances and differences and local needs that we actually agreed that we needed several frameworks and a very broad governance, that we wouldn't just say this is it and be very global about it. You know, this is a global decision, this is what's going to happen, and roll it out to everybody.
Right.
You know, we really had to look back and I think that's the balancing act. If you can balance that local need with the global need, that's the sweet spot, really.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Jackie. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm Cathy Peffen for World at Work TV. Thank you for joining us today.